When I walked up to the front entrance of my husband's company, I wasn't expecting flowers or a warm welcome. I just wanted to surprise him. 22 years of marriage, and I still believed in little gestures like that. I had his favorite lunch in a bag of turkey club from the deli he'd been going to since his first job out of college. I thought it would make him smile. I never made it past the lobby. The security guard at the front desk was a big man, mid-50s, with a silver name tag that said Frank. He looked up at me with the kind of tired patience you develop after years of dealing with the public. "I'm here to see my husband," I said. "He's the CEO. Daniel Mercer." Frank's face did something strange. His eyebrows came together for just a second, and then he seemed to catch himself. He leaned back in his chair, looked past me toward the glass doors, and then looked back at me. And then, I couldn't believe it, he laughed. Not a big laugh, just a quiet, uncomfortable chuckle, like something was funny but he wasn't sure he was allowed to say it. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I see Mr. Mercer's wife every single day." I stared at him. He nodded toward the elevators behind him, toward the lobby corridor. "There she is right now, coming out." I turned around slowly, and there she was. She was maybe 35, slim, well-dressed, carrying a leather tote bag with the company logo on it. She had on a visitor's badge clipped to her blazer. But she moved through that lobby like she owned the building, like she'd walked those floors 100 times. She smiled at Frank as she passed, said his name, "See you tomorrow, Frank," and walked out through the glass doors into the afternoon sun without a second glance at me. I stood there holding that paper bag with the turkey club inside, and I felt the floor shift under me. Frank was watching me with this pained look on his face, like he genuinely didn't know what to say. I could tell he was sorry. That made it worse somehow. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't drop the bag. I said, "Thank you, Frank," turned around and walked back to my car. And then I sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes and tried to understand what I had just seen. Her name, it turned out, was Cassandra. I found that out 3 days later. I didn't confront Daniel right away. I know that probably sounds strange. Most people would come home and demand answers the same night. But I had been married to this man for 22 years. I had 3 kids with him. I had given up a career in accounting to raise those kids while he built his company from a 2-person consultancy in a rented office to a firm with over 400 employees. I knew how he operated. I knew that if I came at him without evidence, without something solid, he would talk me in circles. He had always been good at that. So I waited. I watched. I started paying attention to things I had been too comfortable to notice before. The way he left for work 20 minutes earlier than he used to. The way his phone was always face down on the kitchen counter. The evenings when he said he had a client dinner but never mentioned which client, and never smelled like the steak and whiskey that usually came home with him after those things. I also started going through our finances. That was when I found the first wire transfer. Daniel and I had a joint account that we used for household expenses. But he also had a personal business account that I technically had access to. He'd added me years ago for tax purposes, but had never actually used. I logged in one night after he was asleep and started scrolling back through the transaction history. 18 months ago, there was a wire transfer for $42,000, sent to an LLC I didn't recognize. The name was something bland and forgettable, Summit Point Holdings. I wrote it down. I kept scrolling. There was another one 3 months later. $60,000, same LLC, and another, and another, and another. In 18 months, Daniel had quietly moved $387,000 from our business account into Summit Point Holdings. I sat at that kitchen table at 2 a.m, and I did what I had been trained to do. I was an accountant before I was a wife and mother. I pulled up a spreadsheet and I started entering numbers. By the time the sun came up, I had a complete picture. He had been siphoning money for a year and a half. The transfers were carefully spaced, never regular enough to trigger automated alerts, never large enough to draw attention in any single month. Whoever had helped him structure this knew what they were doing, and I had a very good idea who that was. I called my sister Janet that morning. Janet had stayed in the finance world while I stepped away. She was a CPA with her own small firm, careful and methodical, and she had never fully trusted Daniel. Not from the beginning. I need your help, I told her, and I need you not to ask me how I'm doing right now, because if you ask me that I'm going to cry and I don't have time to cry. She didn't ask. She just said, "Send me what you have." 2 days later, Janet called me back. Summit Point Holdings was registered in Delaware. The registered agent was a law firm, which was normal, and told us nothing. But Janet had a contact who did corporate research, and he had been able to find that the operating address listed on the LLC's state filings was a condo in the Riverside district of our city. A condo that, according to public property records, had been purchased 14 months ago by Cassandra Marie Weston. There it was. I sat with that information for a long time. I kept thinking about the Turkey Club. I kept thinking about 22 years of school pickups and holiday dinners, and sitting up with sick kids at 3 a.m. while Daniel was traveling for work. I thought about the year I postponed my own mother's birthday trip because Daniel said the timing wasn't right for him. I thought about all the small moments I had traded away to build a life with someone who was, apparently, building a different life at the same time. And then I stopped feeling sad and started feeling clear. That clarity was the most useful thing I had ever felt in my life. The first thing I did was find a divorce attorney. Not just any attorney. I asked around quietly among people I trusted, and 3 separate people gave me the same name, Patricia Hollis. She had a reputation for being meticulous, calm, and ruthless in exactly the right measure. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, and when I walked in and sat across from her desk, she looked at my spreadsheet for about 4 minutes without saying anything. Then she said, "He underestimated you." "Most people do," I said. She smiled. "Good. Let's keep it that way." Patricia laid out what we were dealing with in very practical terms. In our state, marital assets are divided equitably in a divorce. The money Daniel had transferred to the LLC was still a marital asset unless he could prove otherwise, and since he had moved it without my knowledge or consent, that actually strengthened our position. We would need a forensic accountant to document everything and provide a clean paper trail for court. Patricia had someone she worked with regularly, a man named Gerald, who had testified in financial cases dozens of times. She also told me something I hadn't expected. "Don't change anything yet," she said. "Don't move money. Don't close accounts. Don't give him any signal that you know. The longer he thinks you don't know, the more we can document." That was the hardest instruction she gave me. I went home that night and made dinner. I sat across the table from my husband and asked him about his day. He told me about a client meeting that had gone well, about a new contract they were close to signing. He was relaxed, easy, the way he always was. Charming. I had married him partly because of that ease, that way he had of filling a room with warmth. Now I sat there and watched him perform it, and I felt almost nothing. Just that cold, useful clarity. The kids were all grown by then. Our youngest, Marcus, was 23 and living in another state. Our daughters, Elena and Sophie, were 26 and 28. None of them lived at home anymore. That made what I was doing easier. I didn't have to pretend in front of them, too. For 6 weeks, I lived that double life. I had breakfast with Daniel on weekday mornings. I went to Gerald's office twice a week to work through financial records. I met with Patricia every Thursday, and I started, very carefully, protecting myself. I opened a new personal account at a different bank, one Daniel had no connection to. I moved my own income. I had been doing freelance bookkeeping for a few small businesses on the side. Nothing dramatic, but it was mine, into that account. I made sure my important documents were somewhere safe. I quietly updated my passwords on everything. And then Gerald found something neither Patricia nor I had anticipated. The LC Summit Point Holdings wasn't just receiving money. It was also paying out to another entity, a shell company that appeared to be operating offshore. Gerald had spent 2 weeks tracing the structure, and what he found was that Daniel wasn't just hiding money from me. He had been using our marital assets to fund what looked very much like a separate investment portfolio that he was building entirely in his own name, completely off the books. "This isn't just a divorce problem," Gerald said when he walked Patricia and me through the findings. "This could be wire fraud. This could be tax evasion. This is potentially criminal." I looked at Patricia. She looked back at me steadily. "That's your call," she said. "We can use this as leverage in the civil case. It gives us enormous negotiating power. Or you can report it to the authorities and let it become a criminal matter. Both paths have consequences." I thought about it for a long time. Here's what I kept coming back to. Daniel had not just cheated on me. He had systematically, deliberately stolen from our shared life. He had taken the financial security that we had built together, that I had helped build by staying home and running our household and supporting his career for 2 decades, and he had quietly been moving it into a future that didn't include me. He had made decisions that would have left me in a very different position than I thought I was in. That wasn't just a personal betrayal. That was a deliberate financial crime against me. "Both," I said. Patricia nodded slowly. "That's what I would do." We filed the divorce petition on a Tuesday morning in October. Daniel was served at his office. Frank, the security guard, who I had since learned was a decent man who had been deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation for months, apparently watched the whole thing from behind his desk. I know because he sent me a card later. Just a plain card. It said, "I'm glad you figured it out. I still have it." Daniel called me within an hour of being served. I let it go to voicemail. His message was what I expected, a mix of shock, anger, and that practiced persuasiveness. He said we needed to talk. He said I had clearly gotten some wrong information. He said he could explain everything. I listened to the message once, forwarded it to Patricia, and blocked his number. He showed up at the house that evening. I let him stand on the porch for 3 minutes before I opened the door, and when I did, I handed him a letter from Patricia's office outlining that all communication needed to go through our attorneys. He looked at me like he had never seen me before. "Karen," he said, "we can fix this." "I know we can," I said. "I'm fixing it right now," and I closed the door. What happened over the next 4 months was not easy. I want to be honest about that, because I think these stories sometimes get told in a way that makes the hard parts disappear. The discovery process was exhausting. There were depositions and document requests and long afternoons in Patricia's conference room going through financial records. There were moments when I felt so tired I could barely stand up, and moments when the grief hit me sideways, not grief for Daniel, but grief for the marriage I had believed I had, the life I thought I was living, the woman who had stood in a parking lot holding a Turkey Club sandwich and not yet understood what she was about to learn. My daughters knew what was happening. I told them as honestly as I could without making them choose sides. Elena cried. Sophie got very quiet and then very practical, which is how Sophie handles most things. Marcus, my youngest, drove up to spend a weekend with me about a month in, and he just sat with me in the kitchen and listened, and that was exactly what I needed. My sister Janet came over every Sunday. She brought food and she didn't let me disappear into the paperwork. I want to say this clearly, I did not get through this alone. People think resilience is a solo thing. It isn't. Resilience is mostly just having the right people standing close enough to catch you when you stumble. The criminal referral moved on its own timeline, separate from the divorce. I had reported the financial activity to the heirs and to the state attorney's office in early November. These things move slowly. I knew that going in. I didn't file the report for a quick outcome. I filed it because it was accurate and because it was right. The divorce settlement came first. Daniel's attorney had spent 3 months trying to negotiate around the LLC money. arguing that it had been legitimately invested, that there was no intent to deceive, that the offshore transactions were a misunderstanding of the structure. Gerald's testimony made that argument very difficult to sustain. The forensic trail was clean, and the documentation was thorough. In the end, Daniel's attorney called Patricia's office on a Thursday afternoon in February and made an offer. It was not a good offer. It was an opening move. We countered. They countered back. This went on for 2 weeks. The final settlement included my share of the marital home, which we agreed to sell. It included half of the verified marital assets, which with Gerald's documentation came to significantly more than it would have without it. It included a structured payout of Daniel's share of the company, because yes, under our state's laws, that company had been built during our marriage, and that meant I had a claim to a portion of its value. It included enough to rebuild. I want to be careful not to give specific numbers because that's not really the point. The point is that Patricia had been right. Knowing what I knew and documenting it properly had completely changed my position. A woman who had walked into a lawyer's office with a spreadsheet and a lot of uncertainty had walked out 4 months later with something solid and real. On the day we signed the final settlement documents, I sat in Patricia's conference room and I thought about that parking lot. 45 minutes in a car in February, holding a paper bag, trying to understand the shape of what I had just seen. I thought about who I had been in that moment, afraid, confused, already grieving something I hadn't fully named yet. And I thought about who I was in that conference room, clear-eyed and documented and free. Patricia handed me a pen and I signed. There's a part of this story I haven't told you yet. About a month after the divorce was finalized, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. It was Cassandra. She sounded nervous. Younger than she had looked walking through that lobby. She said she had gotten my number through a mutual contact, she didn't say who, and she was sorry for calling out of the blue, but she felt like she needed to talk to me. I almost hung up. But something made me stay on the line. She said she had found out about the offshore accounts too. That Daniel had been telling her the business was struggling, that he had been asking her to wait, that things were complicated. She said she had genuinely believed he was going to leave me and start a life with her. She said she had believed that for over 2 years. I listened to her talk. She wasn't asking for sympathy exactly. I think she was asking for something harder than that. She was asking to be seen as a person who had also been deceived. She was asking me to understand that she hadn't known about the money. She was asking me to believe that she had thought what she was doing was wrong in one way, but not in every way. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. I don't know if I believe everything she told me. I don't know her well enough for that. But I have spent a lot of my life being the person who looked away from complicated things because it was easier. I decided not to do that anymore. I decided to just hold the complexity of it, that she had also been manipulated, that she also had been given a version of Daniel that wasn't real, and that this didn't make her innocent, but it made her human. I never spoke to her again after that phone call, but I didn't wish her badly either. That felt like enough. The criminal investigation concluded about 8 months after the divorce. I was not kept closely in the loop as the person who had filed the initial report. I wasn't a central party to the proceedings. What I know is what is now public record. Daniel was charged with wire fraud and tax evasion. He agreed to a plea arrangement. He avoided prison time, but paid significant fines and penalties, surrendered the offshore assets, and agreed to a period of supervised financial reporting. His company was also investigated, and while the company itself was not charged, several of the executives who had helped structure the transactions were. I found out through Janet, who read it in the business news. She texted me and said, "It's done." I was at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee when I got that text. My own kitchen table, in my own apartment. I had moved into a place of my own after the house sold, a 2-bedroom in a neighborhood I had always liked. It had good light in the mornings. It had a little balcony where I had put 2 chairs, even though I mostly sat in just one. I read Janet's text and I sat with it. I thought about the 22 years. I thought about the kids who were navigating their own relationships with their father in their own complicated ways, and who I had tried very hard not to pull in any direction. I thought about the accountant I had been before I became somebody's wife and somebody's mother, and the accountant I was again now, slowly building something of my own. I thought about Patricia, who had sent me a handwritten note when the settlement was signed. I thought about Frank, the security guard, and his playing card. I thought about who I had been and who I was becoming. And I thought about something my mother used to say. She wasn't a particularly philosophical woman, she was practical, Midwestern, not given to big statements. But she used to say that the thing that separates people who rebuild from people who don't is not strength, and it's not luck. It's willingness. Willingness to see what's actually in front of you, even when it's terrible. Willingness to do the next thing, and then the thing after that. I had been willing. That was all. I had been willing to look, willing to document, willing to wait, willing to trust the people who knew how to help me, willing to feel the grief and not let it stop me, willing to be angry without becoming only my anger. That, I think, is the thing I would want to pass on if I could. Not the specifics of my situation, not the name of my attorney or how to file a fraud report, but the basic understanding that you are more capable than you know when the moment asks something real of you, that the person you become under pressure is not a stranger. It's you, more fully than you've ever been before. There's a version of this story where I am defined by what Daniel did to me, where that parking lot, that phone call, that conference room, where all of it adds up to a story about loss and betrayal and pain. And all of that is true. The loss was real. The betrayal was real. The pain was real. And it still visits me sometimes in quiet moments, and I imagine it always will. But that's not the version I live in. The version I live in is the one where I went home and opened a spreadsheet, where I called my sister, where I sat across from a forensic accountant and learned things about my own finances that I should have known years earlier and hadn't let myself know, where I slowly, carefully, methodically built the case for my own life. I finished my coffee that morning. I put the cup in the sink. I went to my little desk in the corner of the apartment and opened my laptop and got to work. There was a new client to invoice. There was a business plan I had been putting together for 6 months, a small accounting consultancy of my own that was finally starting to feel real. There were numbers to run and emails to answer and decisions to make. The light was good that morning. It was coming in at that angle it gets in early autumn, low and golden, the kind of light that makes everything look like it matters. I sat in it for just a moment, felt it on my face. Thought, this is mine. All of it. The work and the light and the apartment and the morning and the life I am building one careful, documented, fully awake day at a time. This is mine. And no one is ever going to take it from me again.